start now. Hi, everyone, and welcome to NYC Builds Bio webinar entitled The Cove JC, a global hub for innovation in the heart of the East Coast Life Sciences Corridor. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Nancy Kelly, and I serve on the steering committee and as a founding member of NYC Builds Bio. First, I would like to acknowledge and thank NAIOP, who is our association partner for this event. NAIOP, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association, is the leading organization for developers, owners, and investors of office, industrial, retail, and mixed-use real estate. NAIOP comprises 19,000 plus members and provides strong advocacy, education, and business opportunities through a powerful North American network. We welcome all of those NAIOP members joining us today. And of course, the founding and corporate members of NYC Builds Bio make all of our programming possible. The Cove JC was recently launched as a joint venture between Argent Ventures and H&R REIT. It will be a transformational catalyst for the greater New York, New Jersey metropolitan area by creating a flagship destination for academic and commercial life science, tech, and medical entities. Connected to New York City and New Jersey and served by 3 international airports, it is on the Hudson River at the mouth of the New York Harbor. Upon completion, this mixed-use campus will encompass 13 plus acres, comprising 1.4 million square feet of lab tech office and 1.6 million square feet of residences with ample room for parking. It also includes a waterfront park that brings the outdoors in and the indoors out for tenants, residences, and the Jersey City community alike. The Cove JC's location also benefits from the largest concentration of biomedical engineers and scientists in the world. Our speakers include Clay McPhail, Vice President of Acquisitions and Asset Management from Argent Ventures, Peter Schubert, Partner, Ennead Architects, Doug Moss, President, Cosentini Associates, Douglas Newman, Director of Environmental Services, Dresdner Robin, and Chris Collins, Project Manager, also of Dresdner Robin. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This webinar is part of an ongoing series of online events hosted by NYC Builds Bio. You can view the series on the event page of the website. Please register for our future monthly webinars in June and July. On June 8th, BM Creative, Milrose Consultants, Skanska, WSP Safety Partners, and other professionals, including Deerfield Management and the New York City EDC, will share the basic understandings necessary to develop a successful laboratory facility and the unique cost drivers behind delivering value and quality. On June 17th, Taconic Investment Partners will offer virtual tours of the Hudson Research Center and the West End campus, a 3.4-acre assemblage on Manhattan's Upper West Side, meant for state-of-the-art, purpose-built research and laboratory space. In July, our member spotlight shines on Boston Properties, one of our new members who will share with us their extensive life science portfolio and plans for New York City. Also in July, C16 Biosciences will talk to us about their move from NYU Biolabs to 19,000 square feet of R&D space at the Hudson Research Center. We will be announcing in-person tours of new developments commencing in September with Deerfield Management's 345 Park Avenue South called The Cure. A date will be announced for that event shortly, and we hope that you will join us for all of this rich programming. Before we begin, I just wanted to cover a few administrative details. There's a program and PowerPoint highlighting the hosts and speakers for the meeting. These will be posted on the NYC Builds Bio website after the meeting. The program is being recorded and will be distributed to all registrants after the meeting. If anyone's having technical difficulties accessing the Zoom room or other issues, please email info@nycbuildsbio.org or send a notice through the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Since most of you are participating in listen-only mode, please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will open up for discussion and Q&A at the end of the program and will address as many audience questions as we can. At the end of the meeting, we will have a chance for smaller randomized groups to meet in separate rooms where you can open your videos and microphones to talk to each other. You can stay as long as you would like to get to know each other and share stories. Now I will open it up to Clay McPhail, Vice President of Acquisitions and Asset Management for Argent Ventures, who will share the remarkable history of the genesis of the Cove JC.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm Clay McPhail with Argent Ventures, the developer of the Cove. Wanted to first just kind of start off, kind of orient everyone with where we are. So if we go to the next slide. So we are in Jersey City. The site is within what's known as the Grand Jersey Redevelopment Area, which is between downtown Jersey City to our north and Liberty State Park to the south. The site there is bounded in red. We have the New Jersey Turnpike extension on the western side and Jersey Avenue, which connects into Liberty State Park on our eastern side. The site extends all the way down to the northern boundary of Liberty State Park to the south. The site, if we go to the next slide, also has easy connections to the Hudson Bergen Light Rail, which forms the northern boundary of the site. There's several ferry stops within the Tidewater Basin, which is directly to our east. And obviously we have the PATH train in Jersey City, which connects into Midtown and downtown Manhattan, the closest stop being the Grove Street stop to us. So now that everybody's somewhat familiar with where the site is and what we're talking about, we have been involved with this site for about 5 years now. We acquired the first lots back in 2015. We completed the assemblage in June of 2020 with the acquisition of the last lot. And then after that started the remediation in the last half of 2020. We had originally conceived of the development as being full residential with some ancillary ground floor retail, which is pretty typical for what you would see in Jersey City. Obviously, this was a much larger scale, but kind of had a typical Jersey City type program envisioned. And to that end, we rezoned the site back in 2017, which allowed us to build 2,845 residential units on about 5 new city blocks with a city pocket park that would be in the middle of those parks, in the middle of those blocks. But the zoning also allowed for a variety of uses, so including lab and office and a few other things. But we didn't really have the idea for life science until about early to mid 2019. Most people who we mentioned it to thought it was a little odd to be thinking about life science in Jersey City. It's definitely very straightforward to underwrite residential product, mid-rise and high-rise residential product in Jersey City. It's pretty easy to finance it and get it going. You know what the costs are, what the rents are, what the leasing velocity is. It's a different animal when you're talking about, a life science project where there's really no local market. And that's when we brought in Nancy and her team to help us assess the market and help us to pull together a comprehensive vision for what the site could be. And so we're happy to be able to present that vision to you guys today. And so I think I'll leave it to the team at Dresdner to talk about some of the legacy issues that we dealt with the site, and then we can go from there.
Thanks, Clay.
Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. Next one. Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Doug Newman, and I manage the Environmental Services Department at Dresdner Robin. Today, I'm just going to give you a very high-level overview of the remediation that was recently conducted as part of phase one of this redevelopment project. My involvement with these properties goes all the way back to 2005, so long before Clay and Argent had acquired the properties. So I've got a lot of history with them, and it was really exciting for me to finally see someone move forward with the remediation and the redevelopment. As you would expect, extensive site and remedial investigations were conducted prior to the commencement of the remediation. And the primary contaminants of concern that we identified and remediated included things like historic fill, which typically includes elevated concentrations of semi-volatile organics and metals. It's important to note that much of downtown Jersey City is reclaimed marshlands, and that these areas were filled at the turn of the century. The material that was used to fill the marshlands was contaminated prior to its placement. And in New Jersey, they call that historic fill. So historic fill is ubiquitous to downtown Jersey City, and for that matter, the Hudson River waterfront. There are really two factors that made the remediation of these properties complex. And one of them was the discharges from all of the extensive industrial activities that took place on these properties. As you can see from the slide that we're looking at right now, industrial activities dominated in this area and did so for decades. A little bit of a side note, you see that massive amount of railroad tracks there south of our property. That is the current location of Liberty State Park, which many of you are probably familiar with. The primary contaminants that we dealt with that were associated with discharges, so this is above and beyond historic fill, were PCBs, petroleum hydrocarbons, and chromium. And in many cases, these contaminants were commingled. So this created a lot of challenges from an investigation standpoint, because we're required to vertically and horizontally delineate the extent of those impacts. But it was also really challenging during the actual removal of those contaminants, because in many cases we had to segregate the contaminants depending on the waste streams in order to get them so they could be received at those waste facilities. And then I think the second factor that really made the remediation complex here was the shallow groundwater table. As you would expect, given the site's proximity to the Hudson River, groundwater is going to be really shallow. In our case, groundwater was roughly about 3 feet below grade, and we had excavations that were being extended to 20 feet or beyond in some cases. So sheeting was required, and extensive dewatering was also required before we can get in there and actually start doing that excavation and removal work. If we can move to the next slide, please. You could see some photos of those remedial efforts underway. All in all, we excavated and disposed of about 30,000 tons of contaminated soil and concrete. Above and beyond the excavation of the contaminated soil, remediation also included the installation of site-wide engineering controls, or a CAP. And this is designed to address the soil contamination that will remain in place. The components of that CAP included a combination of clay, clean fill, and stone, as well as a demarcation layer, which identifies the interface between the clean cap and the contaminated soil below. Next slide, please. This slide just shows some photos of the sites after the cap had been installed. I think it also gives you a good indication of how large some of these properties are. And then again, the next slide, please, is just an aerial photo that shows those sites that were subject to remediation and capping during this first phase. And that's about all I have to you today for the remediation, but I'll be available for any questions afterwards.
Great, thanks, Doug. Chris, do you want to pick it up?
Sure. Thanks, Doug. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Collins. I'm also with Dresdner Robin. I'm project manager and civil engineer, and been involved with some of the civil engineering aspects of the project, as well as some of the permitting aspects for the past 5 years. So in addition to the remediation that's been happening on the site, there's also been a lot that's been going on around the site. As Clay mentioned, the site is very well situated with regard to transit access, and the Hudson-Bergen Light Rail is used by thousands of local residents and commuters alike. And you can see that that passes adjacent to the site on the west and to the north. There's been significant investment in infrastructure and natural resources all around the site. The extension of Jersey Avenue on the east side of the site will connect Liberty State Park and downtown Jersey City, and will also provide easier access to the New Jersey Turnpike extension. In addition, Liberty State Park is slated to have a large-scale ecological restoration for a large part of the park that's been lying dormant for quite a long time. So that will be a great resource for users and residents of the Cove, as well as the surrounding Jersey City community. In addition to those investments, development is booming in the area. The Morris Canal redevelopment area just to the west of the site has had an absolute explosion of development over the last 5 years. And in addition to that, the Jersey City Medical Center has had some expansions to the north, and there's a large redevelopment area situated there as well. To the east, the Liberty Harbor North redevelopment area has had several large-scale residential buildings come online in the last few years. So the Cove can take advantage of this growth and investment in the surrounding area, but as Nancy mentioned, will also be a catalyst for future growth and build out of what is really one of the last few urban brownfields and vacant development sites in Hudson County. Next slide, please. And although this site is complex and we've had a lot of challenges, it also brings a lot of opportunities for public benefit and new infrastructure. And as part of the new infrastructure upgrades needed to support the Cove, we've been working with the City of Jersey City to construct a combined sewer overflow mitigation facility below ground on the west side of the site. And as with many older cities in the Northeast, including New York City, Jersey City has a combined sewer system. So that means that in large rain events, the sewers overflow into local waterways, including the Hudson River. And the city, as with other cities with combined sewer systems, have been engaged in a comprehensive effort to reduce those overflows. So this will become an integral component of that. And locally will prevent a large number of those overflows, which will improve water quality in the vicinity of the Cove and also in the Marina Basin just to the east. And these water quality improvements will allow us to then restore the tidal water body that's on site and create a new restored salt marsh, which is going to be an absolutely fantastic resource for the Cove as well as the community. Next slide, please. And even with all of these constraints from existing infrastructure, sewer improvements, and coastal regulations that we've been working through, I think we've been able to work through all of that and have a really effective campus layout, and that's something that Peter and Nancy will elaborate further on in a bit. Next slide, please. Another opportunity that we have is to implement a large piece of Jersey City's resiliency master plan. As some of you may know, this area was very heavily inundated with tidal floodwaters from Hurricane Sandy. So to mitigate that, we're proposing to raise the ground approximately 5 to 10 feet in most areas to reduce the impact of those tidal surges. And that's consistent with the city's master plan and vision for resiliency in this area. We're providing elevations that are a little bit higher than what is normally required to account for future sea level rise. Something that many people might not know is that in the New York City harbor area, sea level has risen approximately 9 inches in the last 100 years, and that the pace of that increase is only anticipated to grow. So we've accounted for that in our design. And lastly, the restored salt marsh that I mentioned earlier also acts as a soft edge to absorb storm impacts and tidal surges, and will also provide improved habitat for fish and other species. So that's just an overview of some of the challenges and that we faced and some of the progress that we've made. And so I'll turn it over to Nancy to talk about the actual development itself.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. When you take a look at the completed development from this picture, you can really see the transformation that will happen on this site, from a Brownfield site to being converted to natural wetlands that link up to Liberty State Park and the Liberty Science Center beyond it. It's just a very, very exciting location and vision. Next slide. This is an aerial view of the campus, and some of you that are familiar with the Boston or San Francisco areas know that there are places for campuses like this in those geographic locations. But in the greater New York metropolitan area, which includes Jersey City, as well as some areas of Connecticut, there are very, very few vacant parcels of land which could accommodate ground up development of this magnitude. And so the site really presents a very unique and singular asset for the greater New York metropolitan area. Here you can see 2 of the smaller life science buildings with their green roofs, and 3 of the more larger commercially oriented life science tech buildings in behind, with the 2 residential towers off to the right, and the restored wetlands that flow right into the site and come right up to the doorsteps of the building. And this is what I was describing when I said bringing the indoors out and the outdoors in. Next slide. Actually, what we have here is not just the Cove. Liberty Science Center is the most visited science center in the country, actually. And they are planning a development on a large parcel of land which sits directly behind the Cove development. So you can see the highway there. There's an exit right behind what is now going to be SciTech City. It's a new science corridor which will include 100,000 square feet of incubator space called EdgeWorks. There'll be a scholars village for people to live that are working in the EdgeWorks facility. And Hudson County and Jersey City just approved $275 million in funding for a Liberty Science School, which will be a K-12 STEM school. So not only will people be able to live and work on these 2 sites, but their children will be able to walk to school, and they'll be able to walk to lots of recreational activities, as well as cultural attractions in downtown Jersey City and in Manhattan. Next slide. And so what we're planning here is really a development that draws on the workforce that really lives around here. It's the largest concentration of biomedical scientists and engineers in the world. And they have been basically, what we found during our market assessment is that a lot of the people from New Jersey have been commuting to other clusters like Philadelphia and Boston over the last years as the New Jersey life science market underwent a transition, and as pharma kind of closed some of their suburban campuses in favor of locating R&D operations in urban areas across the country. All of that has been changing now, and we found that people are really anxious to live and work in Jersey City in an urban environment where they don't have to commute so far. Next slide. And here you can see the unique location of the Cove. You see the Cove in green, that green circle in the center of your screen. And around it in blue, you can see all of the academic centers in Manhattan. This is the largest concentration of academic medical centers in the world and research institutions. And then off to the left of the Cove in New Jersey, you can see in green all of the major pharmaceutical companies that are located there. Most of the top 20 pharma in the world have significant locations and facilities there. And the Cove is the nexus between the two of them. And so it is a unique location, and we're very, very excited about the possibilities. Next slide. And this just shows you of all of the different kinds of constituents that would utilize the Cove, from pharmaceutical companies to academic institutions to venture capitalists, locating their portfolio companies here, to biotech and tech companies and independent research institutes. They are all here and very, very close by. The Google campus, 1 million square feet, which has just been constructed or is under construction in Hudson Square in Manhattan, is directly across the river, about a 10-minute ferry ride from the Cove. Next slide. As we all know, because we've been talking about it for the last 3 years, as we've been building NYC Builds Bio, New York Life Sciences is on the cusp of really taking off. And this is due to the large number of incubators that have been located here, a renewed emphasis on entrepreneurship by all of the academic institutions. And so we're expecting a number of companies to be graduating from all of these institutions and incubators every year on a year-over-year basis. And they will need some place to grow and develop. And as we've been talking about, there are a number of subclusters that are growing throughout the New York City marketplace with new lab development that's happening there. And it's providing initial space for some of these companies. And we really think that as the companies grow and develop out of their graduation space, they're going to want larger facilities of 25 to 50,000 square feet. And that's where the Cove can accommodate them. Next slide, please. And of course, New Jersey has always been a center of life sciences in the world. All of the pharma companies were located here. And as I said, there's been a major transition over the last 10 years, but the companies that are now moving in are companies focused on cell and gene therapy, small scale biomanufacturing throughout the state. And so New Jersey is actually experiencing a mini renaissance of new companies, both international and domestic, that are locating in the state. Next slide. And what many may not know is that Jersey City is an emerging subcluster on its own. The NJIT, the New Jersey Institute of Technology, just located a pilot campus there for the College of Computing. Whole Foods is opening their regional headquarters. We mentioned the STEM school that Hudson County and Jersey City just approved. 95 Green Street, of course, we've talked about. is being repurposed by Thor Equities for life science use. A Merck spinoff just took 110,000 square feet in the Goldman Sachs Tower last year. And 3 new life science companies have moved in the middle of the pandemic, actually, and established both R&D and biomanufacturing facilities nearby. So Jersey City is itself an emerging subcluster for life sciences. Next slide. And of course, the state has just passed a huge basket of incentives, $11.5 billion focused on transformative technologies like life science, data science, tech, artificial intelligence, medical technologies, digital technologies. And these incentives go for transformative projects like this, which will allow us, hopefully, if we were able to receive such a designation, to offer rental rates which are much lower than surrounding areas, as well as venture capitalists who put their portfolio companies here have access to a great deal of incentives, and companies themselves and their employees. So we're very excited about this. Also, academic institutions who are interested in moving to the Cove or establishing a satellite operation here also have incentives that they can draw on to create such a presence. Next slide. And as has been mentioned previously, this is connected to every major transportation network in the region. So the PATH and light rail was mentioned. You literally can be at the World Trade Center in 15 minutes by getting on the light rail, connecting through Exchange Place on the PATH to the World Trade Center, and then from there to Grand Central and Penn Station, where you can be on Amtrak to Boston or North Carolina very, very easily. The development is serviced by 3 international airports, very easy to get here. The highway comes right by if you're driving. And so there's a number of ways, and Clay mentioned the ferries. You could be at any of the Manhattan life science subclusters within a half an hour on a ferry ride, even out to Biobat. Next slide. And so this kind of shows you what really was the results of our analysis. You know, we saw New York with a number of subclusters emerging. We saw the linkage there to Jersey City, which really is the gateway to the pharma industry in New Jersey, and conceived of this as a global destination hub for life science, tech, and healthcare. We actually confirmed these assumptions by interviewing 40 executives in the pharma, biotech, academic, capital, and tech industries. And the message was overwhelming that if a live, work, play environment like this was present in the greater New York metropolitan area, they would be interested in coming here. Next slide. And it also sits right in the heart of the Eastern US Life Science Corridor, which is the largest, most concentrated locations for life science and tech in the world. And so that's what makes us really excited about this opportunity. Next slide. And so the campus really is going to offer a very diverse set of facilities, from incubator spaces to maker spaces to large-scale manufacturing and laboratory spaces, and all connected by very collaborative open spaces, which are very biophilic in nature. Next slide. And here you can see, and there's also, I should mention that there's actually 1,200 hotel rooms located within walking distance of the site. So not only is it easy to get to, but there's places to stay for visiting scientists and engineers coming in from other countries or other areas of the United States. And we're also planning quite a mixture of retail and dining on site. Next slide. And so this just gives you a flavor of some of the renderings that NEAD has envisioned in terms of what the site will look like. Next slide. But I should also say that this is a custom built, this also could be a custom built development. So for tenants that are interested in really creating their own customized space, none of this has been built yet. It's just been conceptually designed. And so we're having conversations with several companies now that are interested in coming in and creating different kinds of facilities, and we can accommodate them. But of course, we are planning for all of the types of spaces that will support life science and tech, including a vivarium, and all of the amenities that would be needed to attract those kind of companies here, as well as designing the buildings to the highest level of infrastructure. Next slide. And so here you see some examples of that. Next slide. And the phasing. So the residential is in blue, and that will be phased in throughout the different phases. The first phase, which is what we're marketing right now, is in light green. Those are the two smaller academically oriented buildings, but they could also be smaller lab and tech buildings there, or core facilities that could be shared by larger companies in both the Manhattan and New Jersey marketplace. And then the larger light green building is more commercially oriented. It's a very large 500,000 square foot life science tech space. And then the two commercially oriented life science buildings would come on board on phase 2. Next slide. And so you can see that from a Brownfield site to a restored wetland, this has a very exciting vision driving it. And it's great privilege to work with NEAD architects who really translated that vision into a master plan, which reflects the excitement of the place. So now I'll turn it over to Peter Schupper, who will tell you a little bit about that master plan. Next slide.
Well, you know where the site is by now, and it's in the area within the red. And that was the area that we master planned. Next, please. There are two major streets. One that's coming from the east is Etna, and that it intersects with Monmouth, which you can see as a spine running through the site to the west. You're looking at a ground floor to show you that given the resiliency, given the floodplain issues, that much of the ground floor is parking with the program above. However, what is yellow are easily accessible offices at the ground plane, as well as the pink, which is going to reflect some of the mixed use environment up and down the street for retail. Next, please. Oh. At a typical floor, then you can start to see the buildings are fundamentally very flexible. We've got lab spaces laid pretty much everywhere to show the flexibility of it. Assuming labs are 60-40 or even 50-50, you would not need this much lab space, which is in purple and light purple. The sort of more flexible and collaborative spaces and office spaces then are in the orange and the light orange. But you can see very flexible buildings loading from the north, but then, which is on the previous slide, but you can see it all adjacent to the center cores then that become very typical for the kind of commercial life science environment. Next, please. What I'd like to do is turn it over to Doug, because key to this really is Doug Mass of Cosentini. Key to this is really how we approached the path to zero carbon. Thank you, Doug.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Yes, Doug Mass, president of Cosentini. When we first got involved with the project, we looked at it from an opportunity standpoint. What can we do to make this a great campus? And the client is committed to reducing carbon and to reducing the energy use in the building. So we've come up with what we call a path to net zero carbon. How do we reduce the loads in the building? And the first is passive strategies. Obviously, you want a very, very efficient envelope or a coat or a jacket that you're wearing. And item 2, you see, we call efficient systems that are energy efficient. But we're going to focus on item 3, energy recovery, in a moment, and you'll see why there's some tremendous opportunities here. Obviously, working with controls to monitor what is happening and to be predictive, renewable energy off-site. So this is part of the process that we will go through as we analyze how to keep this building as healthy as possible when it comes to carbon. Next slide, please. So I want to introduce a concept called aquathermy. It's a new concept. Some people call it sewer mining, taking thermal energy from wastewater. And this is a concept that's been used for many, many years. If you could see on the slide, over 550 installations worldwide in major cities. And our office was involved heavily in the city of Denver, Colorado. And basically what that's saying is you take all of the sewage coming out of the buildings, showers, a bathroom, sinks, et cetera. There's a lot of energy in there, and how can we recapture it? So let's go to the next slide. This is a bit of engineering, but it's pretty simple. On the left side, you see the wastewater. On the right side are the building uses. And in the middle, we put a link with what we call a heat pump. And when a building needs heat, you take the heat out of the wastewater. When a building is cooling, you reject the energy into the wastewater. And wastewater is within a 50 to 60 degree temperature year round. And you say, why do I bring this up? Well, we have something very unique that is happening on the site. The next slide, please. Well, the red line that you see zigzagging from downtown New Jersey going through the site is in fact the main sewer line from the city of Jersey City. It's an 84-inch sewer main. Imagine 7-foot diameter. You can clearly walk through it. I would not recommend walking through it. And we studied the flow through the sewer, even at low flow situations, high flow situations. And if you go to the next slide, we determined that the amount of energy available throughout a 24-hour period, which is the blue line, exceeds the amount of energy needed for this campus to heat the campus, provide domestic hot water, et cetera. And after we went through our analysis, we can provide about 95% of the heating and cooling energy through this system, through the sewer mining system, which is a unique opportunity for this site. And it will be able to reduce the EUI, or the energy use intensity, in the range of 40 to 50% for these buildings. So it's quite an exciting opportunity. Back to you, Peter.
Okay, next, please. So I think that it's the issue here is the transformational nature of the site and how we were able to achieve, in fact, the site, as well as some of the technology behind it. So I wanted to review it a little bit. Think about what Doug just told you regarding the mining that is going to be immediately left of the holding tank, which was really one of the Rosetta Stones of making this site possible. So that will allow for all of the different scenarios that Doug mentioned, as well as Dresner. The next slide, please. It's really a celebration of the pond itself. Think about those slides that Dresner showed in the early train tracks and whatnot. I mean, it's quite a miraculous recovery that we're able to produce this marsh-filled park. Key to the park will be these sort of retention pods that really are part of mediating between the various tidal flows, along with the holding tank previously talked about. And next, please. And then really all of that adds up to the ability to make this park and really connect to a series of really beautiful waterfront walkways that are happening up and down the Hudson. So ultimately, this is going to be a transformational neighborhood that's also very much revolves around really a return to understanding nature and really what can be done to recover these kinds of properties throughout, perhaps some of the brownfield sites that we know are part of the urban environment. I can't really think of a different environment along the Hudson or even along the East River, which is able to sort of achieve this kind of event and transformation. So again, key to this is this park, but next slide, please. It's also about really creating an environment that's about live, work, play, I always love this slide, particularly because it really talks about really what's great for biotech communities in the sense that they have access to the research, universities, hospitals. As Nancy mentioned, it's really wonderful when you can do that 15-minute walking community now, which will be incredible. I think this will be among the first in the New York area where we're able to do a live and work. And then also that the laboratories will be part of this environment to really make it a 24/7 environment. However, in addition to, I should say, the recovery systems that we just talked about from an environmental point of view, the flip side of that perhaps is the potential of the technology that's available to really blur all these environments and make it into a transformational environment. So Doug, I'm going to return it to you on the next slide, and maybe you could talk about how Smart City will start to really involve and make this a unique environment in the New York area. Next,
Thank
please.
you. Yeah, next slide, please. So traditionally, and many of us are probably sitting in our homes or possibly back to the office, we used to design buildings as a single solitary building. There's very, very little interaction. And moving toward the right, we're now designing campuses. We're designing smart neighborhoods and smart campuses. And what does that mean? That means that it's a campus or a neighborhood which will help you through technology enhance health, community, sustainability. If you see on the right, you might, when you're driving to the campus, it might tell you where there's a parking space or there's a sale at a store. And we want people to be able to go from their home to work to the outdoor space and see how technology can help them. Even things like temperature in your space or lighting in your space. Next slide, please. And what we are talking about, we call it a human-centered digital ecosystem. And we want a predictive built environment, not a reactive environment. And with artificial intelligence today, and there's a concept of digital twin where information is in the cloud, we can actually put sensors in the space and really control and understand in advance what people need and what people want. I mentioned parking, waste management, how waste flows, energy in a building itself. What you might do is, knowing the number of people that have come through the front door, you might be able to adjust the amount of food in the cafeteria. You might be able to adjust the amount of energy being used in the HVAC systems. And then, of course, smart health. What does smart health mean? Monitoring air quality, bring in additional outside air where you need to. So there's a limitless as to what you can do, but this is where we want to bring this community. Back to you, Peter.
So again, the transformational qualities of this, I hope got through into today's presentation. Next slide. But ultimately, it's about people and really making spaces that feel connected to the environment, and in this case, connected to the surrounding urban environments as well. So again, looking eastward back towards the New York City area, I think that this really speaks to a number of the different things we've been talking about today, the environmental impacts and how we've corrected it, as well as how we might do a new post-COVID transformational city of that 15-minute walking environment that's easily accessible by subway as well. Next. Looking at the city, clearly its ability to sort of engage the Liberty State Park, the marine, really spectacular. The views from the tower and the housing will be great. And then obviously the campus itself enjoys an environment around the pond. Next, please. This is the building that really, I think, is the state of the art of buildings going forward relative to really enjoying the outside, really encouraging the outside in, inside out environment. You can see sort of a terrace layer area where there's a potential amenity space that could be not only for this building, but for the entire sort of biotech community. We're thinking, initially about 20,000 square feet if they want it. Next, please. And then ultimately also providing a sort of a cityscape, a kind of an urban campus where there'll be retail environments and amenities surrounding this as well as potential restaurants and retail that will really make it, again, sort of a mixed use urban nature community. Next, please. And then ultimately the buildings themselves are of the size anywhere from 30,000 square feet of floor plate to 50,000 square feet of floor plate. But as we said, it's about 1.5 million square feet of potential real estate for just biotech alone. And here you can start to see how the buildings might have campus-like sort of qualities to them in terms of they're making the space, but also we can even celebrate through the building in the foreground relative to the collaboration spaces, communication spaces that are necessary now to make bioscience a collaborative and innovative process. Next, please. And then the campus itself, this is again the street of Etna and Monmouth as they intersect. You can see the larger, as Nancy said, the scale of the buildings are somewhat fungible, but we're looking at about 1.5 million square feet of biotech. Next, please. And thank you. I mean, Nancy, I turn it back to you, but I hope the message got across that this is going to be, I believe, with this team, and it's been an honor to work with everyone, a truly transformational project for the Manhattan and New York area, as well as the New Jersey area going forward.
Great. So yeah, I share those sentiments, Peter. Thank you very much. And yeah, we're happy to take questions or comments right now. So please feel free to share what you're thinking as you, you know, as you've seen this vision and this possibility. Anyone? You must be all stunned and speechless. Well, let me ask a question. Lindsay Harcum is actually with the New Jersey EDA. And prior to that, he was with the New York City EDC. And I'd love to hear from you what your thoughts are about the Cove and how you think it can transform the area.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you. It's a very exciting project, you know, because there's already, as you pointed out, a strong life sciences ecosystem in New Jersey. You know, with about 18 million square feet of life sciences space, a little over half of that is owner occupied by pharma. But we do have a number of sites that are coming on board and in existence right now. I'm at a site right now, it's a former J&J site at exit 9 off the turnpike that has about 300,000 square feet that I'm involved with managing. So I think the Cove is going to be an excellent addition to what we have right now, and certainly the proximity to New York City and the academic medical centers just makes it truly an exciting project. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and you and I have been talking about the greater New York metropolitan area, right? And you know, it's funny because traditionally the market has been viewed as kind of Manhattan or New Jersey, but
Right.
truthfully, when it's combined, and it is a combined metropolitan statistical area, it is the largest life science cluster in the United States.
Yeah, I think you and I have seen lately that there's some information about that combines the assets. Some of the work out of New York City DCP has looked at combining the life sciences assets and then comparing that in terms of what would the region look like in comparison to San Francisco, to Boston. And when you look at all the academic strengths from the NIH funding to the life sciences space to the talent in particular across New Jersey and New York City, it's a powerhouse. It's a life sciences powerhouse that not only compares favorably to Boston, it exceeds the Boston area when looked at collectively with all the assets combined.
Right. And that's really exciting. And one of the reasons it's so exciting is because there may be federal resources coming down the line for investment in these industries, which would have to be applied for in a regionally directed manner. And so kind of visualizing the greater region, I think, is also a good thing to do because it could bring greater investment in the future. We've got a couple of questions, so let me just throw those out there. What is the timeline for building out the project? So right now, I mean, Clay, you might want to address this as well. I mean, I'm looking, we're looking for anchor tenants. We're in discussions with several companies right now that have exciting prospects. And if we are able to land something, you know, in the next 4 to 5 months, we could start next year. But Clay, you might want to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's accurate. And the other thing I'd mention is we're, you know, obviously there's quite a bit of infrastructure that has to go in here with the site as well. We've been in, you know, continuing discussions, just getting everything lined up with the city of Jersey City, city engineering, the utility authority, and the state DEP to get all our approvals for the infrastructure, and also work on bonding for a component of the infrastructure. So our hope is that all that will be wrapped up and ready to put a shovel in the ground for infrastructure, probably in the first half of next year, hopefully the first quarter. But you know, definitely want to start on the infrastructure work next year, and then hopefully the first phase, you know, will follow also sometime in 2022.
And how long for the next phase of infrastructure enhancements, how long is it likely to take for the stormwater tank to get built?
That's a good question. I don't have a definitive answer on that yet. Partly it depends on how we construct it, which we're still designing. But you know, I would anticipate all of the construction related to the park, the recreation of the wetland. There's some additional sediment that needs to come out of the creek that had been historically impacted, and some additional sewer work related to the regulator and how everything just interconnects there. That could take 9 to 12 months.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions?
Oh, but Nancy, I would mention that that work, it's possible that work could go on at the same time that we're getting the first phase lab building out of the ground, because the two sites aren't, you know, directly on top of each other. So we could have both projects going at the same time, both infrastructure and ground up phase 1.
Right, great point. Great point. Okay, well, if there are no additional questions, we can, I think, it's 2 o'clock, finished right on time. We can drop into our discussion groups.